Hello and welcome to today's historic best of 3 deck tech on Atarka Aggro or Gruul Aggro or Red-Green Aggro. Whatever you want to call it is totally up to you. It is a very old school aggressive deck that is using or looking to use primarily a bunch of creatures and a few support spells to just hit our opponent until they're no longer alive. And since we are an aggressive deck, we'll go ahead and work from the 1-drops up, since that's ideally how you want to draw them in the game. 3 copies of Bomat Courier as a 1-drop with haste, so we can apply pressure immediately, as well as with the Courier you can sort of bank cards to maybe draw them later if you need. We have 4 copies of Fervent Champion as another hasty 1-drop, and First Strike, both of whom are give them a good interaction in combat, as well as for 1 Fervent Champion to potentially buff other Fervent Champions, which allow a 1-drop to quickly become much larger and much more threatening than one would normally assume a 1-drop to be. 4 copies of Soul-Scar Mage, a good 1-mana card that sort of helps or gets a little bit bigger and can take some use out of the non-creatures our deck has. We have 4 Abundant Harvest as a way to smooth out land drops or to look a little deeper for non-lands. Just a very good card that I think if you're running green, you should probably be running. 2 drops, we have 4 Earthshaker Khenra. Again, a hasty threat to apply pressure immediately, as well as the ability to turn off sort of at the first half very small creatures from blocking for a turn. You can also eternalize it late game to give you something to do with your mana later on, and the eternalized body being a 4/4 also lets you turn off bigger creatures as well as just be a bigger body at the end of the game. 4 copies of Atarkas Command. Much like all the commands are particularly good for their flexibility, I think Atarkas, however, is probably the best command we have in the format, since it can often be a skull crack and a lightning bolt to the face. It can also buff our creatures to pump out even more damage. The land card from the hand thing is almost never used, but hey, it's there if you need it. Also running 4 copies of Burning-Tree Emissary for the absolutely ludicrous potential high roll turns you can get early on by flooding the board with, say, several Burning Trees and a couple 1-drops or maybe a 2-drop, as well as, at very worst, it is just a 2-mana 2/2, but the upside or the ceiling is so high that it's worth the potential flop, though it will very rarely flop. 3 drops, I have 4 Anthology Crashers. Again, a nice hasty threat to apply pressure immediately, as well as, much like the Khenra, having the repeated ability to turn off blockers, which is kind of what our aggressive deck wants us to do. Have 4 copies of Bonecrusher Giant, which do the dual purpose of being a good value card. The Stomp just being a good bolt, or I guess a good shock to something, if we need it, be them to clear out opposing creatures or to just throw it at our opponent's face. And the Bonecrusher Giant itself is an okay body. 3 mana 4/3 that's punishing to remove with single target is fine for the deck as well. At the top of the curve, we have 4 Collected Company as a good sort of reload and way to sort of flood the board. Again, much like an Abundant Harvest, one of the better cards in the format, and I think probably the best green card in the format. Land base, pretty simple. I have some Stomping Grounds, some Pathways, some Forest and Mountains, and I have 4 Ramunap Ruins, so we can sort of just sit on a shock we can throw to our opponent's face if we happen to need it, as well as it gives us something to do if we happen to flood, which will inevitably happen. Sideboard, I would like to think, is pretty simple. A couple copies of Roiling Vortex as a way to not only deal a little bit of damage in the decks that are wanting to grind out a little bit longer. It's also a form of life gain hate, and the occasional upside of being able to Lava Axe an opponent's face if they cast free spells, like your Emergent Ultimatum or whatever that card is. is very useful and sometimes will be sideboarded in. Rampaging Ferocidon, another life gain hoser, since as an aggressive deck we don't like our opponents to gain life. Also can punish our opponent for potentially trying to go wider than us by pinging our opponent, or basically every player, whenever a creature enters the battlefield under their control. I have a couple copies of Klothys as a way to have some main deck graveyard hate and a way to go later if we think a deck is going to try and out-control us. Chandra does the same thing in that we bring Chandra in if we think a game is going to go really, really long and a deck is going to try and out-control us. And the fact that Chandra is also a sweeper if you need to, or removal if you need to, is a little bit extra. Though really, Chandra is just an uncounterable thing that puts emblems onto the field that will hopefully put a hard clock on the game. A couple of Scavenging Ooze for more main deck graveyard hate when we need more, because really you only need targeted graveyard hate. You don't need really mass like graveyard hate in the format, in my opinion. A couple copies of Sweltering Suns, because even with the Rampaging Ferocidons, sometimes an opposing deck can just go wider than you, and you need the sort of security that a Sweltering Suns can provide. Though I do acknowledge that sweepers in this deck can be counterproductive sometimes and can do us just as much harm. But I still stand by the fact that I think they should be in the deck. I have a couple of Rex Sage as just a creature that can be hit with Collected Company that hates on artifacts and enchantments, which do sort of dot the format a little bit here and there. I'm also running one copy of Shifting Ceratops because mono blue tempo style decks are still common enough that I think it's worth a single sideboard slot. Admittedly, you can collect a company into it, but against those, again, very tempo, counterspelly heavy decks, you weren't going to be able to cast a Collected Company anyway. And that is Atarka Aggro, or again, Gruul Aggro, or Red-Green Aggro. Just wanted to say thank you all for watching. Like the video if you liked it. Sub if you like me and my content. And if you have any sort of questions or like constructive criticism, that's what comments are for. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.